Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us for this January virtual random review. I'm Connie Georgiou. Deborah Goldenberg and I coordinate random review for Friends of the Library, which sponsors this event. Deborah, would you like to turn on your camera and say hello to the audience?
Hi, everybody.
There she is. Hi.
I hope you enjoy the review today. See you at the end.
A few operational details now. The GoToWebinar program works well for most people, but if you're having technical problems, you can type a question in the question box of your program, your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll try to help you. And if your issues can't be resolved, don't worry, this program is being recorded and you can access it to watch in about a week or 10 days. If you have a question for the reviewer, please type it in the question box and she'll try to answer at least most of them at the end of her talk. After the review, you'll receive a follow-up email, which will include links you can use to access the recording of this random review, register for future reviews, and sign up for our mailing list to receive monthly random review information. At the Random Review webpage, you'll also find a list of library books. They're related to today's topic, and the list was created by our volunteer, Gail Gerdeman. You'll also be able to connect to our Friends of the Library website, where you can join the Friends if you'd like. Friends of the Library provides funding for all the programs that aren't in the library budget, like the very popular summer reading programs, and copies of books for all of those book clubs. Memberships and donations support these programs, and they're especially helpful now when book sales aren't possible. No book sales are scheduled for this year, but we are planning a virtual readathon fundraising event later this winter, so stay tuned. Now I'd like to thank our local sponsors, Grassroots Books and Music, which helps provide books for our reviewers and gives us great publicity. Northwest Graphic Imaging, who designed our annual poster, and the Corvallis Gazette-Times, and especially reporter Jim Day. They provide excellent random review publicity. And a big thank you to the best library, and especially librarians Bonnie Brzozowski and Mike Hansen, who host these webinars and have been instrumental in making the Random Review program possible this year. Bonnie's hosting today's program, and she'll be fielding your questions at the end of the program. Bonnie, would you like to turn on your webcam and join us? Say hello.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. Looking forward to today's review. See you soon.
Next month's random review will be February 10th, when Corvallis writer Greg Kleiner will review Horizon by Barry Lopez. And now I'd like to ask David Grube, a member of our random review selection committee and frequent and popular random reviewer himself, to join me and introduce today's speaker.
Thank you very much, Connie. I'm really excited about this random review today for a lot of reasons. I like this book a lot, and I can't imagine a better reviewer than Audrey Perkins to review Educated. Audrey tells us that she was inspired by being the big sister to three little ones that made her want to be an educator. And so she started her path to education as a teacher in Future Teachers of America when she was 14, just a couple years ago. She's worked as a camp counselor. She's been a writing teacher for Willamette Valley Community School and a writing instructor at Oregon State. She got her BS in political science at Oregon State and a master's in composition and rhetoric there. She then taught English, reading, and success skills at Lynn Benton Community College for 18 years. Specializing in working with students entering the college years, helping them to get started, to gain confidence, and recognize their own sense of belonging in any educational setting. And she retired a couple years ago from Lynn Benton. She has a strong interest in the mechanics of what makes us happy as humans, and she makes people happy. I'll tell you that. By some of her other great talents, which most of you know, she was a fabulous singer with Neil Gladstone and Friends, singing such wonderful roles as a cabaret siren, or a teenager listening to Officer Radford's siren. And so she's a wonderful singer. She also sings with the Gratitude Jazz Band, and she loves to hike, and she is now teaching mindfulness. And so I'm so happy to introduce Audrey Perkins to review for us the book Educated. Audrey?
Thank you, David. That was so sweet. And thank you all to the organizers. Gosh, I'm in amazing company in this review series. And so I'm honored, and I sincerely hope you get something out of this hour of value. There is a lot to pack into this hour. This is a very complex book. It's a long book, and it's just layered. And so I'm going to go ahead and just jump in, and I'm going to read a little bit of the author's prologue, and just so that you can sort of enter her world. As the book opens, we find the author sitting on the edge of her family's farm. She's just a child at this point. Her farm is in a very sparsely populated part of Idaho. Her father grew up on this mountain and refers to it as Princess. I'm standing on the red railway car that sits abandoned next to the barn. The wind soars, whipping my hair across my face and pushing a chill down the open neck of my shirt. The gales are strong this close to the mountain, as if the peak itself is exhaling. Turning towards our house on the hillside, I see movements. My brothers are awake, testing the weather. I imagine my mother at the stove, hovering over bran pancakes. I picture my father hunched by the back door, lacing his steel-toed boots and threading his calloused hands into welding gloves. On the highway below, the school bus rolls past without stopping. I'm only 7, but I understand that it is this fact more than any other that makes my family different. We don't go to school. Dad worries that the government will force us to go, but it can't because it doesn't know about us. 4 of my parents' 7 children don't have birth certificates. We have no medical records because we were born at home and have never seen a doctor or nurse. We have no school records because we've never set foot in a classroom. When I'm 9, I will be issued a delayed certificate of birth, but at this moment, according to the state of Idaho and the federal government, I do not exist. Of course, I did exist. I had grown up preparing for the days of abomination, watching for the sun to darken, for the moon to drip as if with blood. I spent my summers bottling peaches and my winters rotating supplies. When the world of men failed, my family would continue on unaffected. I had been educated in the rhythms of the mountain, rhythms in which change was never fundamental, only cyclical. All my father's stories were about our mountain, our valley, our jagged little patch of Idaho. He never told me what to do if I left the mountain, if I crossed oceans and continents and found myself in strange terrain where I could no longer search for the horizon for the princess. He never told me how I'd know when it was time to come home. There are so many layers to this book, and one layer that I want to address that is actually, it was a little bit distracting for me while I was preparing this review, was how relevant the sort of sub-theme was of the political views of her father and her family, not just political. The time period that this book takes place in ends before Trump was elected, but Tara Westover's family, particularly her father, would have found kindred spirits, probably is finding kindred spirits among those that stormed our nation's capital. So you'll hear some echoing of that In Educated, we get to see a close-up and detailed example of day-to-day life in a family that's living out perplexing and dangerous blend of conspiracy theories, survivalism, religious fundamentalism, with all kinds of strange twists to it, weapons stockpiling, racism, sexism, and deep, deep distrust of the federal government, all smushed together with an added dose of her father's mental instability and the family's certain degree of isolation. Add to that an older brother who beat Tara violently, and a family business that her dad repeatedly managed to allow to injure his children. And this is the world that Tara Westover emerged from. This is at the beginning of the book, and again, just to give people some context and to take us inside the world as she takes us inside as the book opens. My strongest memory is not a memory. It's something I imagined, then came to remember as if it happened. The memory was formed when I was 5, just before I turned 6, from a story my father told in such detail that I and my brothers and sister each had conjured our own cinematic version with gunfire and shouts. Mine had crickets. That's the sound I hear as my family huddles in the kitchen, lights off, hiding from the feds who've surrounded the house. A woman reaches for a glass of water and her silhouette is lighted by the moon. A shot echoes like the lash of a whip and she falls. In my memory, it's always my mother who falls, and she has a baby in her arms. The baby doesn't make sense. I'm the youngest of my mother's 7 children. But like I said, none of this happened. So right off the bat, we can see the author as a young child beginning to have the impressions of somebody else's story of how things are. So in this case, it's her father's story of a national story, actually, and his isn't even very accurate, but she's already internalized that at the age of 5 and made it her own memory. And for the thread that I'm going to follow in this review, that is quite significant. And I know that as such a skilled writer that she is, that she knew exactly what she was doing when she put that as the beginning of the book, chapter 1. Educated, but the story, the real story of Educated is not anti-government or weapons or survivalism or even religion, but of identity, and especially identity in regards to family. Educated is a memoir published when the author, Tara Westover, was only 32. And I say only because those of us who've read it are, I think, somewhat amazed at how much she has grown and learned in 32 years. Educated is written in 3 parts. Part 1, which takes up half the book, covers her childhood up until she leaves for Brigham Young University. Part 2, she writes about college as an undergraduate. And Part 3, she has gone on to graduate school at Cambridge. Through all of it, especially in parts 2 and 3, we see the author in a kind of anguished waking up process as she gradually, ever so gradually, ever so painfully gradually, from the reader's perspective, untangles herself from madness and cruelty, and in so doing, loses her parents and a mountain she deeply loves. While I was working on this, a poem of William Stafford came to mind. And I think it really captures exactly the process that this book traces. It's called The Way It Is. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do stops time unfolding. you don't ever let go of the thread. For this review, as I said, I decided to, there are so many different ways that we could review this book. And I have developed many and finally landed on what I see as really what the book is about, which is that thread. So right now we're just going to continue to follow it like stepping stones to see how she navigates, how she discovers that thread in herself, how she tries to come back and hold on to that thread, how she does hold on to that thread, and how she finally triumphs. So first I'm going to take you to her grandparents' house. So now we're on page 35, chapter 4 in the book. She's at her her paternal's grandparents' house in Arizona where they winter every year. Her grandmother is taking her out to collect stones. And her grandmother tells her an Apache story of that land where they are, of the Apaches being trapped on a mountainside, surrounded by cavalry. The male Apaches decide to die with dignity rather than be slaughtered, and so they ride their horses right over the cliff. When the Apache women found their broken bodies on the rocks below, they cried huge, desperate tears, which turned to stone when they touched the earth. Grandma never told us what happened to the women. As we drove to their trailer, the sun dipping in the sky, its last rays reaching across the highway, I thought about the Apache women, like the sandstone altar on which they had died. The shape of their lives had been determined years before the horses began their gallop, their sorrel bodies arching for that final collision. Long before the warriors' leap, it was decided how the women would live and how they would die. By the warriors, by the women themselves, decided choices, numberless as grains of sand, had layered and compressed, coalescing into sediment, then into rock, until it was all set in stone. So we see her at age 10 or 11 trying to understand how much agency or choice do people have in how the story goes. The next passage, I think I will read this. So very quickly, I want to introduce you to her brother, Tyler, who plays a huge role in her life, in her liberation. And it's another examination for her trying to understand agency. And she will address this again at the very end of the book, and in fact, throughout the book. So they have just gotten into an awful car accident. Her manic father has decided that they should leave Arizona in the middle of the night to drive home rather than waiting until morning. And so the whole family piles into the car, and the 17-year-old son is driving when he falls asleep at the wheel. And it is an awful accident, and a lot of them are quite hurt, but none of them go to the doctors because they are terrified of the feds. Tyler's guilt was all-consuming. He blamed himself for the accident, then kept on blaming himself for every decision that was made thereafter, every repercussion, every reverberation that clanged down through the years. He laid claim to that moment and all its consequences as if time itself had commenced the instant our station wagon left the road, and there was no history, no context, no agency of any kind until he began it at age 17 by falling asleep at the wheel. The next passage I want to read is where she discovers music. And this will turn out to be a multifaceted discovery, as it's the first time that she realizes that people can learn things through some kind of system of learning, and that they can learn it together. We'll also later see how music, her own ability to sing, gets her out into community theater and thus into the world beyond the farm. She also, when she does end up going to Brigham Young, is majoring in music, which at that time she hadn't quite liberated herself as a woman to study whatever she wants, and music was still, not only was it something she loved, but it was something in religious terms was proper for a woman to study. Nevertheless, music does stay a big part of her life. I need a page turner. I'd ask somebody out there to volunteer, but I know you can't. While his brothers wrestled, Tyler listened to music. He owned the only boombox I'd ever seen, and next to it he kept a tall stack of CDs with strange words on them like Mozart and Chopin. One Sunday afternoon when he was perhaps 16, he caught me looking at them. "Which one do you like best?" he said. One was black with 100 men and women dressed in white on the cover. I pointed to it. Tyler eyed me skeptically. "This is choir music," he said. He slipped the disc into the black box, then sat at his desk to read. I squatted on the floor by his feet, scratching designs into the carpet. You have to understand, this is the first time she's heard recorded music. The music began, a breath of strings, then a whisper of voices, chanting, soft as silk, but somehow piercing. The hymn was familiar to me. We'd sung it at churches, a chorus of mismatched voices raised in worship. But this was different. It was worshipful, but it was also something else, something to do with study, with discipline, and with collaboration, something I didn't yet understand. Music became our language. Now every evening when he came in from the junkyard, I would be waiting for Tyler. Then I would choose a CD and he would read while I lay on the floor next to his feet, eyes fixed on his socks, and listened. I was as rowdy as any of my brothers, but when I was with Tyler, I transformed. Maybe it was the music, the grace of it, or maybe it was his grace. Somehow he made me see myself through his eyes. And that's the first time that we see that she's aware that a person can see themselves differently. And I love the fact that the word grace is in that passage a couple times, because Tyler's presence in her life, as if you read the book, I think would agree, is definitely an act of grace. Tyler, who is eight years older than Tara, is a gentle soul who had 1 year of public school, 8th grade, and then taught himself what he needed to go away to Brigham Young, including trigonometry, taught himself trigonometry. So Tyler's paving the way by following his own thread, showing her that that can be done, showing her what following your own thread looks like. And he became part of her journey too. It would be many years before I would understand what leaving that day cost Tyler, and how much and how little he had understood about where he was going. Tyler stepped into a void. I don't know why he did it, and neither does he. He can't explain where the conviction came from, or how it burned brightly enough to shine through the black uncertainty. But I've always supposed it was the music in his head, some hopeful tune the rest of us couldn't hear, the same secret melody he'd been humming when he bought that trigonometry book. So next, I want to share a super interesting passage. There's just a little piece of it that is quite amazing. And it shows her noticing how her father's perceptions are functioning as a kind of lens over her eyes. It's her actually catching a glimpse of that. And at this point, she's about 10, which is pretty amazing. So just a little bit of background for this passage. Her father had estranged himself from his mother-in-law, who was deeply concerned about the life that her daughter had married into and concerned about her children's upbringing, especially without school. Tara didn't get to spend much time with this grandma and had mostly her father's belittling impression of her after calling her frivolous at best. You should always wash your hands after you use the toilet. It can't be that important, I said. We don't even have soap in the bathroom at home. So this is just Tara and her grandma. That's not true, she said. I raised your mother better than that. I squared my stance, ready to argue, to tell Grandma again that we didn't use soap. But when I looked up, the woman I saw was not the woman I expected to see. She didn't seem frivolous. Didn't seem like the type who'd waste an entire day fretting over her white carpet. In that moment, she was transformed. Grandma led me into the bathroom and I watched as I washed my hands, then directed me to dry them on the rose-colored towel. My ears burned. My throat felt hot. Dad picked me up soon after on his way home from a job. He pulled up in his truck and honked for me to come out, which I did, my head bent low. Grandma followed. Having returned to my father, I was taken by the power of his person. A familiar lens slid over my eyes, and Grandma lost whatever strange power she'd had over me an hour before. The fact that the author can so deftly trace the process of noting her split screen between her own agency to choose how she sees things and her father's is amazing to me. This self-awareness. All right, so much to explore in this short time. So in my notes here, I say, let them know that we're skipping zillions of passages that show her father's control over the household narrative. There's also a lot about music and the ways in which Tara's singing actually sort of cast a spell over him, and it provided sort of a crack in his armor. And that crack, in some ways, we could argue is how she was able to leave. So again, maybe it's just my perception, but it seems like music played a huge role in this whole act of grace that helped her find her way. So now I need to share something very, very difficult. So prepare yourself. I've picked a passage that is not even close to the worst, but one of the things that she had to endure was in the many things she had to endure. One of them was the brutal violence, sadism really, of her older brother. For those of us who've read it, the truth is, if it weren't for me doing this review, I don't think I could have finished the book, because there were so many of these scenes in the book and they were so painful to read. But I want to say that I found in doing this review and in combing through the text so closely that I was able to find the piece that she found. But the first reading was so sort of frantic and, you know, that suspense. And I was so distracted by the violence that I don't think I could have gotten through it. But the second time I was able to see this thread. And in the end, to feel that sense of peace that she will share at the end as well. All right. We're skipping a bunch of pages. I'm going to page 109. This is about Tyler. One night he came home late and in a strange mood. Everyone was asleep except me, and I was on the sofa reading a chapter of scripture before bed. Sean plopped down next to me. Get me a glass of water. You break your leg? I said. Get it or I won't drive you to town tomorrow. I fetched the water. As I handed it over, I saw the smile on his face, and without thinking, dumped the whole thing on his head. I made it down the hall and was nearly to my room when he caught me. Apologize, he said. Water dripped from his nose onto his t-shirt. No. He grabbed a fistful of my hair, a large clump, his grip fixed near the root to give him greater leverage, and dragged me into the bathroom. I groped at the door, catching hold of the frame, but he lifted me off the ground, flattened my arms against my body, then dropped my head into the toilet. Apologize, he said again. I said nothing. He stuck my head in further, so my nose scraped the stained porcelain. I closed my eyes, but the smell wouldn't let me forget where I was. I tried to imagine something else, something that would take me out of myself. He held me there, my nose touching the bowl for perhaps a minute. Then he let me up. The tips of my hair were wet. My scalp was raw. I thought it was over. I'd begun to back away when he seized my wrist and folded it, curling my fingers and palm into a spiral. He continued folding until my body began to coil. Then he added more pressure, so that without thinking, without realizing, I twisted myself into a dramatic bow, my back bent, my head nearly touching the floor, my arm behind my back. Apologize, he said. There was a long moment in which fire burned up my arm and into my brain. I'm sorry, I said. He dropped my wrist and I fell to the floor. I could hear his steps moving down the hall. I stood and quietly locked the bathroom door. Then I stared into the mirror at the girl clutching her wrist. Her eyes were glassy and drops slid down her cheeks. I hated her for her weakness. Sorry, this is why I couldn't read it. For having a heart to break. That he could hurt her, that anyone could hurt her. And of course, she's talking about herself. That was inexcusable. I'm crying only from the pain, I told myself, from the pain in my wrist, not from anything else. For 10 years, this moment would define my history of that night and of many nights like it. In it, I saw myself as unbreakable, as tender as stone. At first, I merely believed this, until one day it became the truth. Then I was able to tell myself, without lying, that it didn't affect me, that he didn't affect me, because nothing affected me. I didn't understand how morbidly right I was, how I had hollowed myself out. So, of course, we see her understandable coping strategy of disappearing. So I was trying to figure out where to put some of the positive things about her childhood. So I thought this would be a good place. So when I first was asked to review this book and read a little bit about it, I assumed that she was coming from an environment that was full of violence, that actually sort of held her captive, that was maybe full of poverty. And that is not at all what I found. The only violence in the whole book is from her older brother. Her father was completely crazy, but he was not violent and really not mean to her, I would argue. It's all relative. So some of the other nice things about her life was that she grew up on a farm. They had horses and goats and cows and pigs. She got to spend a lot of time out in nature. She learned to be quite capable as a physically. They were well fed. They had enough money from her father's business. I think they all had their own rooms. Well, she did, and most of her brothers did. So There's some positives for it. I know that a lot of us throughout the book were shouting, especially when we saw her approach Sean or get in the car with Sean, that we were shouting, get out, get out. And finally, she makes a move. So now we're going to go to chapter 15, page 132. And now she is about 16, and she has decided to pursue studying music, to follow in her brother's footsteps, Tyler's footsteps, and go to Brigham Young. And her father has sort of looked the other way temporarily, or at least not said no yet. And this is where we pick up. There was a moment that winter, I was kneeling on the carpet listening to Dad testify of Mother's calling as a healer, when my breath caught in my chest, and I felt taken out of myself. I no longer saw my parents in our living room. What I saw was a woman grown, with her own mind, her own prayers, who no longer sat, childlike, at her father's feet. I saw the woman's swollen belly, and it was my belly. Next to her sat her mother, the midwife. She took her mother's hand and said she wanted the baby delivered in a hospital by a doctor. I'll drive you, her mother said. The women moved towards the door, but the door was blocked by loyalty, by obedience, by her father. He stood immovable, but the woman was his daughter, and she had drawn to herself all his convictions, all his weightiness. She set him aside and moved through the door. I tried to imagine what future such a woman might claim for herself. I tried to conjure other scenes in which she and her father were of two minds, when she ignored his counsel and kept her own. But my father had taught me that there are not two reasonable opinions to be held on any subject. There is truth and there is lies. I knelt on the carpet listening to my father, but studying this stranger, and felt suspended between them, drawn to each, repelled by both. I understood that no future could hold them. No destiny could tolerate him and her. I would remain in child, in perpetuity always, or I would lose him. Now we're right after that, her father comes into her room, and which he had never done before, sat down, and here's what he had to say. The Lord has called me to testify. He is displeased. You have cast aside his blessings to whore after man's knowledge. His wrath is stirred against you. It will not be long in coming. I don't remember my father standing to leave, but he must have, while I sat gripped by fear. God's wrath had laid waste to cities. It had flooded the whole earth. I felt weak, then wholly powerless. I remembered that my life was not mine. I could be taken out of my body at any moment, dragged heavenward to reckon with a furious father. The next morning, I found Mother mixing oils in the kitchen. I've decided not to go to BYU, I said. And again, for those of us reading the book, our poor partners had to listen to us shouting, no, no. All right. Next, following the thread of Tara. Following her thread. Next, we're going to watch her inner dialogue as she's becoming herself. Sean had a motorcycle accident, and she, against the whole family fear of encountering anybody in any authority position, she saw that Sean had brain damage from the accident, and so she drove him to the hospital. So here we find them in the waiting room. Her father had come to the hospital. Sitting across from me is my father, and as I look into his worn face, it hits me. A truth so powerful, I don't know why I've never understood it before. The truth is this, that I am not a good daughter. I'm a traitor, a wolf among sheep. There's something different about me, and that difference is not good. I want to bellow, to weep into my father's knees and promise never to do it again. But wolf that I am, I'm still above lying. And anyway, he would sniff the lie. We both know that if I ever find Sean on the highway soaked in crimson, I will do exactly what I've just done. I am not sorry, merely ashamed. So now we're going to skip ahead. She's gone to BYU. She's been there. Let's see, how long has she been there? Yeah, she's been there. She's completed her first year. And we're going to be encountering Charles, who is a boy, the first person that she ever had a crush on, and she met in theater, and she was allowed to do theater by her family, mostly because of her singing. It was everybody in the community where they lived, there was only like 259 people in the whole town. So, and it was a Mormon community. So when her father gets concerned about her stepping out into the world, she's actually stepping out into a Mormon world, but it's not one he can control. So it's not okay. Charles sat quietly while I talked and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Are you angry with your parents that they didn't put you in school?" "It was an advantage," I said, half shouting. My response was instinctive. It was like hearing a phrase from a catchy song. I couldn't stop myself from reciting the next line. Charles looked at me skeptically, as if asking me to reconcile that with what I'd said only moments before. "Well, I'm angry," he said, "even if you aren't." I said nothing. I'd never heard anyone criticize my father except Sean, and I wasn't able to respond to it. I wanted to tell Charles about the Illuminati, but the words belonged to my father, and even in my mind they sounded awkward, rehearsed. I was ashamed of my inability to take possession of them. I believed then, and part of me will always believe, that my father's words ought to be my own. Again, we see her struggling with agency. Who owns my mind? And ultimately my destiny. So she is now working in her father's scrapyard for the summer. For the rest of the afternoon, for the rest of the summer, I was nigger. This is from Sean. I'd answered to it 1,000 times before with indifference. If anything, I'd been amused and thought Sean was clever. Now it made me want to gag him. Or sit him down with a history book, as long as it wasn't the one Dad still kept in the living room under the framed copy of the Constitution. I couldn't articulate how the name made me feel. Sean had meant it to humiliate me, to lock me in to an old idea of myself. But far from fixing me at place, that word transported me. Every time he said, "Hey, nigger, raise the boom," or "Fetch me a level, nigger," I returned to the university, to that auditorium where I'd watched human history unfold and wondered at my place in it. The stories of Emmett Till, Rosa Parks, and Martin Luther King were called to my mind every time Sean shouted, "Nigger, move to the next row." I saw their faces superimposed on every purlin Sean welded into place that summer, so that by the end of it, I'd finally begun to grasp something that should have been immediately apparent. That someone had opposed the great march toward equality. Someone had been the person from whom freedom had to be wrested. I didn't think of my brother as that person. I doubt if I will ever think of him that way, but something had shifted nonetheless. I'd started on a path of awareness, had perceived something elemental about my brother, my father, myself. I had discerned the ways in which we had been sculpted by a tradition given to us by others, a tradition of which we were either willfully or accidentally ignorant. I had begun to understand that we had lent our voices to a discourse whose sole purpose was to dehumanize and brutalize others, because nurturing that discourse was easier, and retaining power always feels like the way forward. I could not have articulated this, not as I sweated through those searing afternoons in the forklift. I didn't have the language I have now, but I understood this one fact, that 1,000 times I had been called nigger and laughed, and now I could not laugh. The word and the way Sean said it hadn't changed, only my ears were different. They no longer heard the jingle of a joke in it. What they heard was a signal, a call through time, which was answered with a mounting conviction that never again would I allow myself to be made a foot soldier in a conflict that I did not understand. All right, so now we're home from Christmas and at the following year, and she is grappling with more torture from Sean, who she keeps getting in the car with. And this is a really important passage. It's got a whole bunch of stars on it in my notes, so you know that. Okay. So she is trying to reconcile. Okay, so this is Sean. He brings me the ice wrapped in a dish towel after he's severely hurt her, and says the next time we're having fun, I should tell him if something's wrong. He leaves. I return to my journal. Was it really fun and games I write? Could he not tell he was hurting me? I don't know. I just don't know. And we see her trying to trust her own perceptions. I begin to reason with myself, to doubt whether I had spoken clearly, what had I whispered and what I had screamed. I decided that if I had asked differently, been more calm, he would have stopped. I write this until I believe it, which doesn't take long because I want to believe it. It's comforting to think that the defect is mine because that means it's under my control. I put my journal away and lie in bed, reciting this narrative as if it's a poem I've decided to learn by heart. I've nearly committed it to memory when the recitation is interrupted. Images invade my mind of me on my back, arms pressed above my head. Then I'm in the parking lot. I look down at my white stomach, then at my brother. His expression is unforgettable, not anger or rage, no fury, only pleasure. Then a part of me understands, even as I begin to argue against it, that my humiliation was the cause of that pleasure. It was the objective. This half-knowledge works in me like a kind of possession, and for a few minutes, and I love this section where she's sitting there writing in her journal, and she's going back and forth between these realities of how she wants to see it and how she really is seeing it. This half-knowledge works in me like a kind of possession, and for a few minutes, I'm taken over by it. I rise from my bed, retrieve my journal, and do something I've never done before. I write what happened. I do not use vague, shadowy language as I have done in other entries. I do not hide behind hints and suggestions. However, I chose to remember that event would change everything. Reflecting on it now, I'm amazed by it, not by what happened, but that I wrote what happened. That from somewhere inside that brittle shell, in that girl made vacant by the fiction of invincibility, there was a spark left. Oh gosh, we have, all right. 257. So now she has gotten her bachelor's degree and, well, she's in her bachelor's degree. She is at Cambridge for a year of study abroad. And here she finds the words of Bob Marley in a song that a friend sent her. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. I scratched those lines into notebooks, into margins of the essays I was writing. I wondered about them when I should have been reading. From the internet, I learned about the cancer that had been discovered on Bob Marley's foot. I also learned that Marley had been a Rastafarian and that Rastafari believe in a whole body way, which is why he refused surgery to amputate the toe. 4 years later, at age 36, he died. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Marley had written that a year before his death, while an operable melanoma was at that moment metastasizing in his lungs, liver, stomach, and brain. I imagine a greedy surgeon with sharp teeth and long skeletal fingers urging Marley to have the amputation. I shrank from this frightening image of the doctor and his corrupt medicine, and only then did I understand, as I had not before, that although I had renounced my father's world, I had never quite found the courage to live in this one. I flipped through my notebook to the lecture on negative and positive liberty. In a blank corner, I scratched the line, "None but ourselves can free our minds." Then I picked up the phone and dialed. "I need to get my vaccinations," I told the nurse. Oh, there's so much. We're running out of time. All right, I'm gonna have to skip some stuff. One of the things that those of us who read the book know is that he continues to return home, which is really pretty crazy. But it worked. All right. So what happened after that was, let me see if I can have time here. So her parents come to visit her, and her dad's trying to save her. "The Lord has commanded me to testify," Dad said. "She may yet be brought to the Lord." While my parents plotted how to reconvert me, I plotted how to let them. I was ready to yield, even if it meant an exorcism. A miracle would be useful. If I could stage a convincing rebirth, I could disassociate from everything I'd said and done in the last year. I could take it all back, blame Lucifer, and be given a clean slate. I imagined how esteemed I would be as a newly cleansed vessel, how loved. All I had to do was swap my memories for theirs, and I could have my family. It was the moment. If I accepted the blessing, he would cleanse me. All I had to do was yield, and in 5 minutes it would be over. But what I heard myself say was no. Dad gasped at me in disbelief. Then he began to testify, not about God, but about Mother. The herbs, he said, were a divine calling from the Lord. Everything that had happened to our family, every injury, every near death, was because of her healing. "I will offer you a final time to give you a blessing." The blessing was a mercy. He was offering me the same terms of surrender he'd offered my sister. I imagine what a relief it must have been for her to realize she could trade her reality, the one she shared with me for his. How grateful she must have felt to pay such a modest price for her betrayal. I could not judge her for her choice, but in that moment, I knew I could not choose it for myself. Everything I'd worked for, all my years of study, had been to purchase for myself this one privilege, to see and experience more truths than those given to me by my father, and to use those truths to construct my own mind. I have to say before I read the very, very end, that after she said no, she had a very, very scary dream. In fact, she found herself out on the street outside of her dorm, sleepwalking, having nightmares. She proceeded to stop going to classes. And finally, after a few more weeks of this, I stumbled from my bed one night and decided that I'd made a mistake, that when my father had offered me the blessing, I should have accepted it. But it wasn't too late. I could repair the damage, put it right. I purchased a ticket to Idaho for Christmas. And this is when spouses of those of us who've read it really are hearing us shout. We're only a few pages from the end of the book, and she's still going home. She's still changing her mind. I can still fix this, I chanted as the plane lifted off the tarmac. All right, so I need to read the very, very end. When I was a child, I waited for my mind to grow, for my experiences to accumulate, and my choices to solidify, taking shape into the likeness of a person. That person or that likeness of one had belonged. I was of that mountain. The mountain had made me me. It was only as I grew older that I wondered how, if I started, is how I would end. If this first shape a person takes, is there only true shape? So she did find peace. That peace did not come easily. I spent 2 years enumerating my father's flaws, constantly updating the tally. Once justified, I thought the strangling guilt would release me and I could catch my breath, but vindication has no power over guilt. No amount of anger or rage directed at others can subdue it. I shed my guilt when I accepted my decisions on my own terms, without endlessly prosecuting old grievances, without weighing his sins against mine, without thinking of my father at all. I learned to accept my decisions for my own sake, because of me, not because of him, because I needed it, not because he deserved it. She's referring to her 16-year-old self looking in the mirror. Until that moment, she had always been there. No matter how much I appeared to have changed, how illustrious my education, how altered my appearance, I was still her. At best, I was two people, a fractured mind. She was inside and emerged whenever I crossed the threshold of my father's house. That night, I called on her, and she didn't answer. She stayed in the mirror. The decisions I've made after that moment were not the ones she would have made. They were the choices of a changed person, a new self. You could call this selfhood many things: transformation, metamorphosis, falsity, betrayal. I call it an education. That's how the book ends. So the book obviously hit a universal chord. In 2018, the year it was published, it was ranked as one of the top best books of the year. 2019, the New York Public Library System announced that education had been checked out more frequently than any book throughout its 88 branches. Tara Westover herself was chosen by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people of 2019, and the book is currently being translated into 45 languages. There's more that I wanted to share, but I want to give a couple minutes for questions. So thank you, and may you follow your thread.
Awesome. Thank you, Audrey. That was wonderful. We don't really have time for many questions, but we also don't really have many, but or actually any. But I wanted to share a comment that we did get from Ruby. Ruby says, first of all, excellent review. And then she's also struck by how normal the author Tara Westover sounded and felt about her family during an interview Ruby heard last year in Portland. Ruby read this book along with Hillbilly Elegy and Heartland when she was trying to understand the election and the part of our country that isn't Corvallis. So I thought I'd share that. It was kind of interesting, her reading there.
Thank you. So one of the things, if we don't have any questions, one of the things that I found myself doing when I read the book was feeling sorry for her in a way that kind of distanced me from the same common humanity of the same kinds of struggles in myself, in all of us. And so, yeah, I was really struck by all the ways in which we can relate to the book, all the ways in which we find ourselves not thinking for ourselves when we feel stuck in a situation, when we are toying with the idea of cutting ourselves off from unhealthy relationships, especially family. What do we do when we are in situations where people in charge ask us to do dangerous things, which is quite relevant in COVID. But as we end, and I want to thank everybody, gosh, there's this amazing poem. If you get a chance, read the poem, The Journey by Mary Oliver, because it's really how I wanted to end the presentation. But instead, I'm going to end it with a video of Tara singing that Bonnie's going to play.
Yeah, we'll put that on, and then we'll have everyone come say goodbye. And then just really quick, Michelle says that she felt the same as you when she read the book, Audrey. So she really, I think, kind of had some similar impressions and similar feelings as you did. So thanks for sharing that, Michelle. Let me get that video pulled up here. Awesome. And if Deborah and David want to join us, we can all wave goodbye. And that was such a wonderful review, Audrey. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Audrey.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, audience members, for joining us.
That was great, Audrey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, audience, for joining us.
See you next time.
See you next time, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.